Hello everyone and welcome to ITMO. ITMO stands for Instant Transformation Moment. And those of you who've attended ITMO events before, you'll know that the reason we call it that is that we use a very rapid technique called the 3Q method to activate our spiritual intelligence. And it works in a second or less. That's why we call it instant transformation. So we get together every week at the same time, Wednesdays at 12 noon GMT, to activate our spiritual intelligence together. This week, I'm a bit late because I had a problem with the internet access. So this is going out a bit later than normal. But if you can join us live every week, that would be great. If not, you can watch the video recordings. Now, before we engage spiritual intelligence together, I want to spend a bit of time on talking about belief in God. So let me just share with you an article I wrote, which is relevant to this topic. If I can find it here. I think this could be it. Let me just find out. No, that seems not to be it. Let me try something else. Now, I seem to have lost access to this article for the moment. So I'm just going to take a moment now to reconnect to this article because I want to share with you something about this topic from this article. So just give me a moment now and I will bring it up. This could be it here. No. It's funny, I had it a minute ago before I started this broadcast, and now it's just disappeared. So I'm going to have to reconnect to it, and I'm looking for the quickest way to do that. This might be the quickest way to do it. Here we go. Right, I'm going to see if this has worked or not. So, yes, I think it has worked. So this article that you see on the screen now is called The Full Spectrum of Intelligence. You can find this article on the SQ website, sqi.co. Now, if we go down this article, we'll get to a paragraph called The Separate God Idea. And I want to read these couple of paragraphs here because they throw light on this question of belief in God. Do we need to believe in God? Now, when we talk about belief in God, it's normally understood to mean belief in the existence of a separate creator God, rather than belief in the divine in general. It's taken to mean belief in a separate personal God, not the divine in general. So this paragraph is headed The Separate God Idea. The ultimate dimension of intelligence beyond SQ, spiritual intelligence, is TQ, transcendental intelligence. TQ is the intelligence of transcendental consciousness, which is non-individuated, self-existing, self-radiant feeling awareness. However, if you merely believe in the existence of a transcendental dimension of reality as an article of faith, without actually experiencing transcendental consciousness as your own inherent source, then transcendental reality is objectified as something separate from yourself. This gives rise to the idea of a separate God. The objectifying effect of religious belief thus personifies transcendental reality in the form of a separate deity, right? So we can see from this paragraph that the idea of a separate God is a product of religious belief. And it goes on. According to religious belief, human beings are, quote, made in the image of God, unquote. But according to transcendental intelligence, it's the other way around. From the non-dual TQ point of view, the religious idea of a separate God is made in the image of the human ego, as a counterpart to the apparently separate self. Accordingly, transcendental intelligence realizes the divine not as the separate creator of separate beings, but as the ground of all being, the non-separate self-condition and source condition of all apparently separate beings. Now, this is the important bit. TQ, therefore, does not require the idea of a separate creator God, because transcendental intelligence recognizes the appearance of the universe as a stepped-down modification of, in and as, self-existing, self-radiant, transcendental consciousness itself. And there follows a few links there to other sources on the topic of transcendental intelligence. So the overall point being made here in these two paragraphs is that belief in the existence of a separate creator God is not necessary, that when you take into account the perspective of transcendental intelligence, then it's obvious that the world and everything in it is a modification of the divine. If you like, there's only God, and God is manifest as the world. So we don't need the idea of a separate God to explain why the world exists, because the world is God in a stepped-down, modified form, right? And so, as when we access spiritual intelligence, some people might say to us, well, where's your idea of God? Where does God fit into this? And they might accuse us of being atheists because we don't talk about God. Well, the reason we don't talk about God is that God is already assumed in the transcendental vision that SQ practitioners include. So we don't need to talk about God as a separate being, because God is understood to be the very context, the very source, the very nature of everything. But not God in the sense of a separate creator, God in the sense of the divine as everything that is, right? So when it comes to the question, well, belief in God, we don't believe in God, we don't believe in the divine. It's either an experience or it's something that we know nothing about, right? In other words, either you experience the divine in the form of the world, or you're not yet open to that experience. But there's no place for believing in something, no place for believing in God, because there's no need for belief. I mean, after all, belief relies on insufficient evidence, because if the evidence was sufficient, you wouldn't need to believe it, you would know it. So spiritual intelligence and transcendental intelligence are all about knowing, not about believing anything. So we definitely don't believe in God when we're accessing our spiritual intelligence. There's no need. And at the same time, we're not atheists, because we recognize the existence of the divine as the source of all that is. So I hope that's clarified the relevance of believing in God to spiritual intelligence. So let's move on now to exercise our spiritual intelligence together using the 3Q method. By the way, if there are any questions on today's topic, or any other topic for that matter that's related, please write to me. You can leave a comment under the video and I'll reply. So let's look now at how we use the 3Q method, the very rapid 3Q method, to activate our spiritual intelligence. And you can follow along with me as I explain the method and use this method to experience your own spiritual intelligence. So this symbol represents 3 dimensions of intelligence: IQ, EQ, and SQ, intellectual intelligence, emotional intelligence, and spiritual intelligence. And the symbol opens out into the twin poles of attention. We have the object pole of attention and the subject pole of attention. At the object pole is everything you're aware of: thoughts and emotions, memories, beliefs, self-image, you name it. States of body and mind, anything you can be aware of is at the object pole. Whereas at the subject pole of attention is simply consciousness itself, which is what we are. We are the consciousness of objects of attention. Now, when you identify with consciousness itself, that's called being the soul. And when you identify with the object pole of attention, thoughts and emotions and the body and mind, that's called being the ego. And so spiritual intelligence is all about shifting from ego to soul. So what you see on the screen now then, with the ego and soul at opposite poles, represents the human operating system. You're either in the ego or you're being the soul. One or the other. There's really no third alternative. You're either being the ego, identified with your thoughts and emotions, or you're being the soul, identified with consciousness itself, which is aware of your thoughts and emotions. The only exceptions to these 2 positions are in deep sleep, when you're in neither position, or transcendental intelligence, which is prior to both poles of attention. So other than TQ or deep sleep, you're either being the ego or being the soul. So this represents your operating system. And the whole key to accessing spiritual intelligence is to shift from ego to soul, and therefore shift from being identified with thoughts and emotions to being identified with consciousness itself. Now, the connection between ego and soul is this mechanism of attention. And so we have to find our way through this mechanism to activate our spiritual intelligence. And it so happens there are 3 rapid steps through this mechanism which immediately shift you from ego to soul. The steps are notice, feel, and be. Now, in a moment, I'm going to describe what these 3 steps amount to, so you can do them along with me and therefore experience your spiritual intelligence as a result of completing these 3 steps. So let's look at the first step, notice. And notice simply means to notice the human operating system. Just to remind yourself that the human operating system has these 2 poles, the ego at the object pole and the soul at the subject pole. When you identify with your thoughts and emotions, you're being the ego. When you identify with consciousness itself, you're being the soul. So this is the false self and the true self, all right? Ego being the false self, the soul being the true self. So step 1 is simply to remind ourselves that this is our operating system. And the reason we have to remind ourselves is that we so often forget, don't we? We just forget that I am the one aware of my thoughts and emotions. We get so immersed in our thoughts and emotions, don't we? That we assume that I am what I'm thinking. I am what emotions I'm having, So step 1 is just noticing that, all right, yes, I am the one aware of whatever I'm aware of. Step 2 is feel. And that means to feel what it's like at the subject pole, as the soul, as consciousness itself. And for step 2, for this step, we use a breathing technique. So I'm going to describe the breathing technique now, and you can do it along with me. So bring your attention to your breathing. Just find that still point at the end of the in-breath when you're neither breathing in or breathing out. There's a still point in the breathing when you're neither breathing in or breathing out. Just find that still point. Did you find it? It's important not to hold your breath, by the way. This is a naturally occurring still point at the end of the in-breath. Just look for it again. Find that still point when you're neither breathing in or breathing out. It's very short. It's less than a second. Right? Did you find that still point in the breathing there? Okay. So now feel what it feels like in that still point at the end of the in-breath. How does it feel for you in that still point at the end of the in-breath when you're neither breathing in or breathing out? Feels peaceful, doesn't it? Did you notice that? Just check it out again. Find that still point at the end of the in-breath and feel what it feels like in that still point. Feels peaceful, doesn't it? Yeah? Have you noticed that? Notice what happens to your thinking mind in that still point when you're feeling peace. Check it out again. The thinking pauses, doesn't it? When the breathing pauses, the thinking pauses, and that's why you feel peace, because it's the thinking that introduces all the disturbance. Right? So each time you breathe in and you come to that still point at the end of the in-breath, just find that peace in the still point. Right, so this is step 2. You're feeling the peace at the subject pole because the object pole momentarily disappears. Right, the mind stops operating momentarily in that still point. And that means you're feeling the subject pole, consciousness itself, and its qualities of peace. But we're still on step 2. We have a further step to go, which is be. So let's get back to step 2. Let's get back to feeling that peace at the end of the in-breath. Then I'll lead us into step 3. So just feel what it feels like in that still point at the end of the in-breath. And when you find that peace there, move on to step 3, be, which means be that peaceful feeling. That simply means allow the peaceful feeling to go all over your body and mind. Right, so have you got this sequence? First you notice the twin poles of attention, then you feel what it feels like in the still point at the end of the in-breath, and then you be that peaceful feeling, allow it to circulate throughout your body. Now just take a look around now. Just confirm for yourself that you are now being consciousness itself. You're being the field of consciousness itself. And within the field of consciousness, all the objects of consciousness may continue to arise. Thoughts and emotions in your body, perceptions, memories, beliefs, whatever. But you're simply being the field of consciousness within which all these objects of consciousness arise. And since you're being the field of consciousness, you experience all the qualities of the field, not only peace, but compassion and joy and love and integrity and creativity. All these qualities and capabilities spontaneously emerge when you're simply being consciousness itself. And this is called spiritual intelligence. Now notice one very important fact. You can do these 3 steps anywhere at any time in association with any activity. Notice, feel, and be. And when you get good at it, you can complete these 3 steps in a second or less. Right? So please do experiment with this throughout the day. Notice, feel, and be. I like to use it when I'm queuing up for something. You know, in the supermarket waiting for my turn to pay, or at the traffic lights waiting for the lights to change. Just instead of allowing my mind to wander and think all the random thoughts it's used to doing, I simply activate my spiritual intelligence. Notice, feel, and be. And instead of being inundated with random useless thoughts, or mostly useless anyway, which cause agitation and concern usually because they're just ruminations, instead of that, I can enjoy the peace and compassion and love of spiritual intelligence while waiting in the queue. It's a much better occupation. So do give it a try yourself throughout the day when you remember to. Notice, feel, and be. And prove to yourself this actually works. Because once you've proved it to yourself, it's yours for life. You can use it for the rest of your life to raise your consciousness and to shift from ego to soul and experience your spiritual intelligence. Now, of course, we're doing this for our own benefit, but we're also doing it for the benefit of the world. When we get together and activate our spiritual intelligence together, we're contributing to elevating the consciousness of the entire globe, not just our own consciousness, because it's been proven that when people get together with the intention of contributing to others, that we actually do have a measurable effect on the consciousness of others around us. So please do join us if you can next week at 12 noon on Wednesday, GMT, so that we can together elevate our own consciousness and contribute to the consciousness of the entire globe at the same time. Now, if you can't make it live, I understand not everyone can make it live, then the video will be available as a recording on the SQ Facebook page. And please do look above this video for further links to other resources that you may find useful. So I'm going to leave it there for today, and I hope to see you next week. Bye-bye for now.